How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the channel. Personal unions are one of the best ways to gain large amount of provinces in game, and yet it is one of the least understood mechanic even by players who have hundreds of hours in EU4. The reason is that most of the game mechanics guiding PUs are actually hidden. It is just the way devs decided to make the game. You don't question the whim of Paradox gods. I remember when I started playing EU4, the only thing I knew about PUs was that it needed a royal marriage. Then around 300-hour mark of my total playtime, I got into a succession war and I had no idea what happened there. So I started reading about PUs and succession wars, and I found this awesome post on the Paradox forums. This post was written in 2014, but I believe the PU mechanics haven't changed since. Some of you may know about the post I'm talking about. It's basically the only one that goes into detailed PU mechanics. When I started making EU4 video guides, I thought PUs is one topic that 95% of players don't understand at all. And I should make a guide on it too. So here it is. If you haven't seen the Paradox forum post I'm talking about, you can check the link in description. Also, I will take this opportunity to thank Advix, author of said post, for letting me use his material to make this video. With that thought, let's jump into it. I will divide this guide into 3 parts. First, we will start this guide with some basics on how to get a PU and some basic tips to increase your chances on getting a PU over another country. That will be followed by an in-depth review of PU mechanics, hidden game mechanics, and some answers that raise more questions. Third part will be some general tips and musings by me. Let's start with some PU basics. The primary requirement for PUs is that both countries need to be Christian nation and they cannot be a theocracy or republic. Although Dutch Republic and Noble Republics are exceptions. Now there are a few ways you can get a PU. Let's have a quick look at them. First is event. There are some scripted event-based PUs in game, such as Iberian Wedding, Poland-Lithuania PU, Brandenburg PU on Ansbach. Also, some countries start with PU subjects such as Aragon, Burgundy, Denmark, etc. Second is Restoration of Union CB. The game gives this CB either by event or missions, or if you just lost your PU subject. Royal marriages are the most common way. If you have a royal marriage with a country and it goes into disputed succession, you might get heir of your dynasty on their throne, and a succession war if their ruler dies without an heir. If you have the same dynasty as another country and they have a disputed succession, that means either no heir or an heir with weak claim. You can take the diplomatic action to claim throne. This will only show as option if your prestige is equal or higher than the target nation. So claiming throne requires 2 things. One is you need to have the same dynasty, and second, you need to have higher prestige. Taking this action gives a -50 relations penalty to all countries you have a royal marriage with, including a -100 opinion penalty with the target nation. I will be using the term target nation a lot in this video. Target nation means the country that we are trying to get PU on. The biggest benefit from claiming a throne is that it gives you a claim throne CB to force the target country into a personal union for 84% war score, rather than hoping their same dynasty king will die without an heir. Since this CB always costs 84% war score regardless of size, it's one of the best ways to gain large areas of territory for little cost. Also remember that the claim throne CB is removed once the target country gets a strong heir, so you have to act fast and break through sometimes. In broad terms, those are the ways you can get a PU over the country. There's more complexity to it, obviously, which we'll discuss in part 2 of this guide. First, let's look at some beginner tips on how to increase the likelihood of you getting a PU. Prestige is your best friend. Aim to have 100 prestige at all times. You need to have higher prestige than the country you're trying to PU. Luckily, AI currently does a pretty terrible job of maintaining high prestige in game, though this might change in future patches. You can change your message settings to show events in other countries. This is somewhat helpful and might help you catch the death of an heir by an event. But if you get annoyed by too many pop-up messages, you don't have to do this. I will briefly show you how to change the message settings. Go to the message settings in menu, then click on all, then interesting, and search for event. Now select these 4 to show as pop-up. Then depending on where you are playing, you can select nations as interesting by clicking on this star thing. You can also change the pop-up setting when the message shows up. Like I said, this will help a little bit, but it's mostly a personal choice. Watch the disputed succession alert in top left. I check it every couple of months or so. Even if you have the message settings on, if their king or heir dies in battle, you won't get the pop-up. So this disputed succession alert is your best friend in PU game. To keep your PU subjects loyal, again, farm prestige as much as you can, as PU subjects get 1% liberty desire. For each point their overlord is in negative prestige. That means minus 100 prestige for you is 100% liberty desire for your PU subject. Also, unlike vassals who get liberty desire based on their relative strength of all vassals compared to the overlord, PU subjects only get liberty desire based on their strength versus the overlord. It doesn't matter how many subjects the overlord has. So you can have a lot of big PU subjects, but as long as you're stronger than each of them individually, you're good. If a subject is getting close to 50% liberty desire, be at war constantly and never be at peace for a day. Your subjects cannot declare independence if you are at war. Use their armies to fight wars to weaken them further, give them provinces which decreases liberty desire, and it also spawns rebels in new provinces which would weaken them even further. If your subject gets someone to support their independence, you need to declare on them immediately. If you can't get a relevant CB, instantly rival them and declare a humiliate war. If the liberty desire is still a problem, you can always enable the loyalist faction. Giving some money for less liberty desire is a good trade. There are also some ideas that will help you with PUs. Diplomatic idea group is great as you can break royal marriages without stab hit, and it gives you more diplo rep, means easier to royal marry neutral countries. Influence gives less aggressive expansion for when you force PU, also less diplo annex cost for when you need to integrate subjects, and additional diplo rep. There are also a lot of policies that give you +1 diplo rep, which also helps. If you're a Catholic nation, you should try to become the Curia controller. It will help you in two ways. One, you can break the royal marriages without any malice, and two, it will ensure you don't get excommunicated, as you get -50 opinion with all Catholic countries when you're excommunicated, making it harder to royal marry a neutral country. Keep improving relations with every Catholic country, as you never know when they might be heirless and you might need to RM them. And last but not the least, pray. PU game is mostly RNG, and you are at the whim of the paradox gods. Next, let's look at possibilities of what could happen if the ruler of a country dies heirless. This is the beginner's edition. We'll go into more detail in part 2 of this guide. If the tooltip says a noble from their house succeeds to the throne, royal marry them immediately. You might get your dynasty on the throne, or you might get a PU or succession war or inheritance. Refer to part 2 of this guide for more details on that. If the tooltip says a noble from some other house will succeed to the throne, that other house has more development than your country. You need to become stronger than them to install a noble from your dynasty. A noble from your house will succeed to the throne. You're the strongest, most developed of all the RM partners of the target nation. A dynasty spread is great. Keep an eye out for future heirs with weak claims or no heirs. If the tooltip says some other country will inherit them, that other house is stronger than your country. So you need to get more diplo rep, stability, and total development or province count. Also hope the target country monarch doesn't die just yet. If the tooltip says you will inherit them, that's fantastic. This happens very rarely though. If the tooltip says there's personal union under your country, awesome. Happens less rarely, but it's still possible. A succession war between some other country and some other country, you need to get stronger and do it fast. If they are of your dynasty, claim throne and you will be the defendant in the succession war. Succession war between your country and some other country. You are the successor, that is the defender, so it should be an easier fight. Succession war between some other country and your country. You can contest the PU as an attacker, so hope the monarch dies and prepare for the fight. On the tooltip of succession war, the attacker is listed on the right, just something to keep in mind. One caveat to all these scenarios is that the target country cannot get under direct PU or a succession war if they are at war themselves. This concludes the basics part of the guide. Part 2 is where we are going to get into some of the advanced game mechanics to see how the PU system works and what you can do in different disputed successions in more detail. Fair warning though, it's pretty complicated, so new players, please don't get intimidated by it. The following information is not entirely necessary to get PUs. Some of it is more satisfying the curiosity of how PU mechanics work in game. Let's start with something the original author of the post referred to as tiers or eras. I think phase is a better term, but it doesn't matter what you call it. Let's see what it does. Apparently the game runs a phase system. There are 3 phases. We will call them phase 0, phase 1 and phase 2 because we are very creative with names. Each phase has their own rule set on what happens when a monarch dies, and each country has their own individual phases. In an unaffected world, the basic rule set applies. Phase 0 begins at the start of the century and lasts for 75 years. Then phase 1 starts and lasts for 5 years. Then phase 2 starts and lasts for 20 years, bringing the 100-year cycle to a close, which then triggers phase 0 again. It's cyclical like that. At the start of the game in 1444, phases are randomized for each country. Now this basic rule set of when the phases begin is modified further by in-game events. And here's the list of those events. When target country's monarch dies, even if there's a Queen Regency or Regency Council, the target country gains or loses provinces, the target country moves its capital, there is a new HRE emperor elected, or there's a new Curia controller chosen. Suffice to say, it's quite complex to calculate the phase of a nation at a particular date. Why is it this complicated? Because the devs wanted to have a good RNG element to it, and because you don't question the whim of paradox gods. Now, we know that each country has different phases throughout the game. These phases determine what happens to a country when the monarch dies heirless. Let's look at each phase individually. Phase 0. Since this phase lasts for 75 years, you will see this happen most likely. If the target country has no royal marriage and no dynasty, a local noble succeeds. Like we see here in case of Baden. They don't have any other country's dynasty and they don't have a RM either. So the tooltip says that a local noble will succeed. By the way, this tooltip you see here is your second best friend after the disputed succession tab. You need to look at this time and again. If the target country has a royal marriage but not the dynasty, the strongest dynasty spreads. Like in this case of Castile. They have a RM with Portugal, Naples and Savoy, and Portugal is the strongest nation among those, and hence their dynasty will spread to Castile on monarch's death. If the target country has no RM but have a dynasty, if there is only one eligible country, the country with the same dynasty gets a direct PU. If there is a valid contestant, there is a succession war. And if you claim throne, you will always be the defender in succession wars. So to summarize phase 0, there will be a dynasty spread most of the time. But if there is no RM, but they have a dynasty of another country, it might result in a PU or a succession war. Phase 1. Since this phase only lasts for 5 years, you won't see it happen very often. Only this phase can result in direct inheritance, but only if the target country has 15 or less provinces, and if you have more than double the number of provinces than them. Like here, you see Ormond is going to get inherited by Great Britain if the monarch dies heirless. By the way, if you have never seen it before, direct inheritance means you get all their provinces for no cost. No admin or diplo points are used. Remember, direct inheritance happens only if the country has 15 or less provinces. If they have more than 15, the rule set of phase 2 applies, that we will see in a minute. Phase 2 lasts for 20 years and you will see most PUs or succession wars in this phase. If the target country has no royal marriage and no dynasty, a local noble succeeds like always. In every other case, there is either a direct PU or if there's a valid contestant, a succession war will happen. I will put a link in the description with a flowchart on what we just discussed so you can look at it again later. And that's the whole concept of phases in EU4 and what happens in each phase. Now you might have noticed I said strongest nations gets the PU or strongest dynasty succeeds. What does the strongest mean? How does the game decide who is the strongest? Turns out it is the development of the country. Actually, it's the autonomy modified development of a country. You can view your autonomy modified development from the institutions tab, but there is no way to check other countries' stats on it. So the country with highest autonomy modified development gets a dynasty spread, inheritance or PU depending on what phase the target country is in. Succession wars might also happen and we will cover that in the next section. Before that, let's look at another example of my Austria game. I showed you this earlier. Ormond was heirless with an old monarch and I noticed that they were going to get inherited by Great Britain. So we know for sure that Ormond was in phase 1. So I royal married Ormond, but the tooltip did not change. It was most likely because Great Britain has more autonomy modified development than me. And I figured that because as soon as I finished my war with the Ottomans and gained some provinces, the tooltip changed to a von Habsburg will succeed to the throne. This tells us two things. One, obviously I became stronger than Great Britain, so the difference between my and Great Britain's autonomy modified development was probably not that much. And two, Ormond was no longer in phase 1, which is understandable as phase 1 lasts only 5 years. Was all that a bit too confusing? Don't worry, you don't need to know what phase the country is in. You can make a guess, but really what will help you is this tooltip. See what it says here and then act accordingly. We will discuss that and explore what to do in different situations. First, let's look at what succession wars are and when can you be the aggressor or defender. The defender and aggressor in a succession war is determined by certain factors. A defender is the country that claimed throne. So if you claim throne and there's a succession war, you will always be the defender, making the war easier as you can call in your allies and the target country will fight on your side. If no one claimed throne, the royal married partner of the target country with most autonomy modified development will become the defender. Okay, so now we know who the defender is, but how does the game decide who's the aggressor if the target country shares the dynasty with more than one country or if they have more than one royal marriage? Here's where another hidden aspect called military rating comes in. Military rating is calculated by military tech level, military ideas, generals, combat ability modifiers, morale, discipline, and war exhaustion. So the aggressor is the country with the highest military rating among the countries who share a dynasty with the target country, are the RM partners of the target country, are the rivals of the target country, and are the rivals of defensive claimant. Notice here that the rivals of the target country and the rivals of the defender are also eligible for succession wars. Remember this information as it will come handy in the next section. Here's where I will end the first part of this guide, as the whole guide was going to be too long. See you guys in part 2 of this guide.